All right, welcome to the All Access Entertainment Podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Bruen, and a very special guest this week. We have none other than ring announcer extraordinaire, Mr. Tony Chimel. Tony, thanks for joining us this week.
Oh, you're welcome. A pleasure to be here, Joe.
Appreciate you being here and take a little deep dive into your career and all your accomplishments. And it's been a great run so far, and can't wait to see what's next for you. And rewinding back a little bit. Growing up as a kid, when did you first discover pro wrestling?
Probably back when we were like 6, 7 years of age, something like that. We all used to watch it sometimes on a Saturday morning. It was professional wrestling and roller derby in where I grew up in South Jersey. And then when we were about 7 or 8 years old, Monsoon moved in right down the street from our house. And, I was friends with his son and all that. And, we just continued to watch wrestling occasionally and stuff like that.
And when did you first decide, you know what, this is something that I would like to do? I'm gonna give it a try. And how did that process unfold?
I never really decided that. Like I said, growing up near Monsoon, I was best friends with his son, Joey Marella. And, like when we were in high school, Gorilla owned part of the business before Vince Jr. took over. And we would, on weekends or in the summertime, help Victor Quinones set up the ring and travel to Baltimore or Washington or Scranton or whatever, just it was a fun little gig. And we just were setting the ring up and doing it when we were, 18, 19 years of age. And just kind of fell in my lap. We would do that and it'd be fun to get out of town for a day or two or, that's how it started.
When you're doing ring crew like that, at what point are you officially under contract? When does that transpire?
Okay. So like I said, Gorilla owned part of the business, as did a couple other people. Phil Zatko, a guy in Harrisburg, Arnold Skolin owned part of it, and Vince Sr. owned part of it. So when Vince Sr. died, Vince Jr. took over the entire company. He bought out Gorilla and all that. So we were like, well, we don't have a ring to set up anymore. But a couple weeks later, Vince Jr. called up Gorilla and said, hey, does your son want to work for me? And set up the ring for me. And Joey said, yes, he would do it, Gorilla, and Vince said he could bring a friend with him to help him, be on the ring crew. And Joey asked me if I wanted to do it. And I said, yeah. So in November of 1983, we drove up to Stamford, Connecticut and went to the office there and signed the papers and became employees of what was then known as Titan Sports.
And when you're doing that, obviously, like you said, you're doing ring crew here and there. You're doing, obviously, you're a ringside attendant early on in your career, kind of taking the gear from everybody. At what point do you test out the ring announcing? Is it asked of you or is it something you'd like to do?
Yeah, again, you kind of get back in those days, you got thrown into the gig, and I think we're in like East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania or something setting up. And Joey came to me and he's like, hey, Arnold Skolin wants to know if you want to ring announce. The ring announcer didn't show up. And I said, I don't know how to ring announcer, and they were telling me, well, all you got to do is just announce the guy as he comes in. You don't need to get in the ring. Just sit at the table by ringside and announce the guy as he comes in. I said, well, I'm wearing like shorts and a t-shirt here. Yeah. Right. They said, we don't care. We just need somebody to do it today. We'll pay you $50. I said, okay, I'll do it.
Yep.
So
and is that how it worked?
Thrown in my lap, really. That was the very first time. And then it wasn't, like that happened, that was the start of it. And I started announcing every week. It was a couple years down the road or whatever after that, I kind of, they said, hey, go out and get a suit or something, and if somebody doesn't show up, you can do it. And, you just sit from watching the matches and taking jackets, you see how other people do it. And then you can just go from there.
And once you started ring announcing, were you getting any tips from Howard Finkel? Any advice?
I know Jim Ross when I first started doing it at TV. I don't know why I remember this, but the one thing that he always said to me was, make sure your shoes are shined, because Vince always looks at people's shoes and they want to make sure that their shoes are shined. So, I learned a lot from Howard, and I'm trying to think who back then also. There was a guy named Frank Chisnowski who was ring announced like up in Hartford, Connecticut, or when we were doing shows in Connecticut. And just kind of the more you do it, the more experience you get, and the more comfortable you feel.
And any interactions or memories over the years with some of the other ring announcers there, like Bill Dunn or Manny Garcia?
I know both of them. They were nice guys. Bill Dunn was the merch guy, and he I guess they had him ring announcing for a little bit. Manny Garcia was more of like a host. They were trying to incorporate some sort of host into the show, that was in the crowd and doing interactions with the crowd in between matches and stuff like that.
And you said you were good friends with Joey Marella growing up. Obviously we lost Joey too soon. When it comes to that, there aren't interviews out there with Joey. It was at a time where obviously there was no social media. What was it like growing up with Joey? What was he like?
He was the best. He was the best man at my wedding. Really good friend. I owe him and his family everything that I got from WWE, because without them, I would have never had this job. But he was a really good guy. Loved sports, especially baseball. We both did. So he was a Phillies fan. I was a Mets fan, or still am a Mets fan. And we would go back and forth all the time talking baseball and arguing about, whose team is better and stuff like that. But he was a great guy, and he just loved to play sports. The first time when I said they moved into the neighborhood, we lived in a little cul-de-sac, right up the street from where they moved in. And we were playing street hockey, I believe, at the time. And he came up and with a stick and was like, hey, can I play too? We didn't even know who he was at that point, but we're like, yeah, come on, let's go, and it just, it ended up, he was a couple years younger than me, but he ended up going to the same high school as I did, and it was just a good relationship, a really good guy.
And Brian R. Solomon's book just recently came out, The Irresistible Force, all about the life and times of Gorilla. What memories do you have of Gorilla over the years?
Gorilla was the best. He would do anything for anybody. He was always a good friend to me. I remember when he was, he wasn't like the other dads who was home every day, but you come home on like a Wednesday afternoon or something, and there was Gorilla shooting hoops with Joey and me, and, we played pig or horse or whatever, and Gorilla loved playing pool too. And they had a really nice pool table in their house, and we would shoot pool there and things like that. And I remember one time when we were young, we were probably like 8 years old or something like that, just being stupid kids. And a bunch of us were giving Joey a wrath of shit, like, hey, wrestling's fake, and, your dad is fake, and, we don't believe any of this crap and all that. So after about a day or so, there's a knock on my door, and Gorilla's at the door talking to my dad. And Gorilla's just like, hey, can you tell your son to simmer down a little bit? He's harassing my kid. And my dad's just probably looking up at him like, okay, I will do it. And, but I mean, Gorilla could have been an ass about it or anything like that, but he wasn't. He was always polite, respectful, greatest guy. Like I said, him and the whole family,
And you mentioned also, obviously, the Golden Boy, Arnold Skalden. Back in the day, he'd be one of the guys that would pay the boys, and he was very, very old school. What was he like? Your experiences with him?
Arnie was great. Loved to play cards. We'd play cards with him. We played gin or crazy eights. I know that he liked to play, what's that board game with the little cribbage, I think, with Andre.
Oh, yes.
They'd be back in the locker room. Arnie be smoking a cigar, playing cards or whatever. He's like, "What do you need, kid? You want your couple $100 for the show? You want an advance or something like that? Or, if you were taking jackets, you got paid like $50, I think. And if you time kept, you got paid $50. And Arnie would be the guy that you would go to sign the paperwork, and he'd pay you. Had the big Halliburton briefcase full of money.
Yep. Now, as you're ring announcing, you're starting to become comfortable eventually. When was it that you became comfortable with that role? How long did that take?
When I started doing it on a pretty semi-regular basis, I remember we were overseas one time, and they were doing some, I guess, I don't know if it was a TV or filming it or something, but Bruce Pritchard was there. And after the show, he said to me, like, "Hey, Chimel, you're pretty good. Have you ever thought about ring announcing on TV?" And I think that was what opened the door for me to move forward with ring announcing on TV and stuff like that. I guess Bruce liked the way I was doing it. And, I think they always felt too, like when we were traveling on the road, whether I was with Joey or Kyoto, they were both referees and I was a ring announcer. So you're not going to have a show if the ring's not there. So if the ring is there, you're guaranteed to have at least one referee and a ring announcer too. So they're killing like 2 or 3 birds with one stone, to do there. So, that's the way it was back in the day. You had to do a bunch of different things.
And when it comes to this, you said it kind of just fell in your lap and turned into a whole career. If it didn't happen that way, what do you think you'd be doing?
I don't know. Because I started when I was like 19 or 20, 21. I was working in a warehouse, I know, in South Jersey, working there before I was with WWE. But, I tell people, I was very lucky to get the opportunity, but I was very good to keep the job for 38 years, So it's kind of a double-edged sword there where, appreciate the luck of being able to that fall in my lap and just grow with the company that way, but also if I wasn't any good, they would have shit canned me years ago.
Right, exactly. 38 years is a huge accomplishment, obviously, and in any job, but especially in the wrestling business. People come and go, so to be there that long, it's certainly a testament to your dedication and your skill. So you're there that long. You're there for the 80s boom. You're there for the new generation in the 90s. And then, of course, the Attitude Era and right into the, the John Cena Ruthless Aggression era. Did you have a favorite era to be a part of?
Not really. But, when WWE was fighting with WCW and, they were kind of winning, you're always worried about like, oh, what's going to happen with the business, and this and that. And I remember, it was just like a little high school type of shows we were running or small arenas, until Hogan came around, and then it just like boomed and exploded. And it was like, you go from doing shows in little high schools a lot of times to doing double shots, one in, the Capitol Center and then in the Spectrum in Philly on the same day. And, both places are packed with, Hogan. And you just think that the business is going to be like that forever. And then when he left, it was like, you're like, what the hell's going to happen now? And I remember talking to Chief Jay Strongbow, and he said to me, he's like, "Jimmy Chammy, the business is like a roller coaster. It goes up and it goes down. It goes up and it goes down, And, that made me kind of feel a little bit better. Like, oh, hey, you have good times and bad times, just like in life or whatever. And that's the way that business goes,
And a lot of people, they don't know what really goes into setting up that ring. Nowadays you have a huge crew doing it. Yeah. But, back in the 80s and early 90s, it was probably a much smaller crew. What was that experience like, and what did it take to set up a ring?
Well, it all depended on where we were at. Just like the roller coaster, up and down. Some places were crappy, some places were good. Yeah. So a couple instances, we used to do a show in Burlington, Vermont, and it was just 2 of us on the crew. So it was like me and Joey or me and Kyoto. and you would have to park outside the front door of this. I guess they called it an auditorium. It held maybe about 2,000 people. It was basically a big basketball court,
Right.
And so you'd have to park outside the front of the arena. Then there was about maybe 20 steps up to the front door. Then you go through glass doors, through a lobby, and then onto the basketball court and set up the ring on the center of the basketball court, So that it all depended on how long you had or how far you had to lug the crap,
Right.
to do that. And, when you're doing a show in Burlington, Vermont in January or something, and it's freaking 2 degrees outside.
Yeah, exactly.
You're freezing. So that's the bad ones. But then we would do a show like Rochester, New York at the War Memorial there, where you could pull the truck up depending on if it was hockey season or not hockey season. We could pull the truck almost all the way up onto the ice and just about right by center ice. Plus, they had guys there. That was a union building, and they had guys there, like 6 or 8 guys that would help us set the ring up. So, and we would do Rochester, New York, just like Buffalo or Syracuse, probably almost like once a month back in those days.
Yeah.
So after a few months, the same guys are helping us all the time. You become friends with them. They know exactly how to unload the truck,
Right.
Exactly how to set the ring up.
Oh.
So it took like 45 minutes and we're done,
Yeah. That makes such a big difference.
Yeah. There's the
How long does it normally take otherwise?
Well, in a place like Burlington, Vermont, it might take, 2 hours or so with just 2 people,
And some of the stories I've heard is the Manhattan Center was another difficult one.
Oh, yeah, that place was brutal. But see, that's where they started doing Raw. Everything had to go up an elevator,
Right.
So you would have to load it on the elevator, not the whole ring, but just parts of it, send it up, set that up, that part, and, load more into the elevator. But once they started doing Raw there, they had a ring just for there. So it was left there and, taking it in, you did once and then you just let the ring there. You saw to tear the ring down, but they put it over in a storage area or whatever. And then, once they stopped doing Raw there, then you had to take it out of the building. But yeah, that place wasn't too good. I remember setting the ring up on that Intrepid, that big ship, with the Lex Luger thing. And that we had to do was, I guess they had a big crane or something and just a big thing. So you'd unload the whole ring onto this big platform or whatever. And then the crane would lift it up onto the ship. And then you would just set it up from there.
Wow. Some unique places for sure. Like you mentioned, the USS.
Yeah, every place is different. And,
yeah,
it would suck. And when you did the buildings that sucked or were harder to tear down,
right.
And you got, it's going to take you an hour and a half or 2 hours after the show is over.
Oh.
And then you got to drive 3 or 4 hours to the next town. It's really brutal.
Right. And when did it officially change? You went from the blue WWF box trucks to, the 18 wheelers and you had streets filled with them. When did that actually happen?
Well, they started because they wanted to have, you go to these buildings and some buildings have decent lighting, some buildings don't, some arenas had the scoreboard in the center of the ice and lights that would point right down onto the ring. But, they were tired of all that. And some they wanted to enhance the look of the show. So they had to bring in, trussing and a light system and the sound, the music. We were starting to play the music when it first came out of a little boombox or ghetto blaster, we used to call them. And, you just plug into the microphone cord or put the microphone up to the speaker and play the person's music. And you know how those things go. Sometimes the tape gets stuck or something breaks or something like that. So they just wanted a more professional thing. I don't recall the year, but I know that's when you had to go from just a ring truck to stuff that's going to hold, stuff that's going to hold a sound system and hold a lighting rig and maybe a little stage and the ring. So, that kind of changed. We didn't have to drive the truck anymore. So we were now in rental cars, which made things a lot better. There's a huge difference between driving a truck and driving a rental car.
Yeah. Now you mentioned, as far as the ring announcing aspect goes, obviously when it comes to Edge, that's one of your most popular, if not the most popular, as far as your announcements go. But early on in your ring announcing, was there anybody that you enjoyed ring announcing more than others, whether it just rolled off the tongue or?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's anyone specific, but I always liked, the main event guys, like Taker or Stone Cold, and The Rock and all that. I mean, you just got to try and figure out what syllable to hit is harder than the other syllables and stuff like that, and just find your own little niche, as far as announcing somebody. And I don't know, I really didn't think too much about it. I just kind of went out there and did it and just try to put emphasis on the person's name and put the talent over,
What was your first meeting with Vince McMahon like when you first met the guy?
I don't know if I remember the first time when we first went up there and got hired. I didn't see Vince at all. We were working for, HR, I guess. The human resources department was making us fill out the paperwork. We met our boss, which was Robert DeBoard, I think at that time, who lasted probably a couple of years. I probably ended up having about 10 different bosses through my career. Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, there wasn't really any specific time where I met Vince. He just, especially when you started coming to TVs all the time, he knew who you were and, hello, how you doing and stuff like that. So
sure.
I know later on in my career, Vince, every time he saw me, he would always say, Chimel, you still work here? And I'm like, and I would say, well, not necessarily, but you're still paying me. And he would say, oh, I might have to look into that. I'm like, no, don't worry about it. I'm working.
Yeah, exactly. Now, another crew of guys that were there forever and are actually, some of them are still there to this day, the camera guys, whether it's Rico or Rambo, Marty Miller, Stu, obviously Marty's in producing now, but what are those guys like? Any backstories of their personalities?
Oh, they're all good guys. I mean, as far as TV goes, they are huge fans of the camera guys. And these guys, Vince taught all these guys the WWE way, what to get and what shot to get the expression on the guy's face, get the correct angle, make sure that the fans are seeing what they want them to see, not something that you don't want the fans to see. And they're just over time, they learned all that and they were all great guys. They still, like you said, still a lot of them are there and they'll be there until who knows when, because they know the deal about, what to shoot and how to shoot it. So and a lot of them work other stuff like football or, hockey or basketball or whatever, baseball. You can just insert a lot of those guys into those sports. Sure. And, they're not the director or producer would not be on top of the camera guys in those sports like Vince or the directors or the producers in WWE would be on the camera guys, because, how many times do you watch a game and it's like, oh, the camera guy got the wrong shot or something, and
right.
you don't see where the guy running with the ball is. You're seeing something else. They didn't want that kind of stuff at WWE. They wanted, and these guys know what to shoot by now. And it's all, when you see Cena coming down when he first comes out of the entrance, he holds up his little towel or whatever. That's Stewie. They've been working together for years. And Cena knows what Stewie's going to do, and Stewie knows what Cena wants. And,
right.
It goes, And
you mentioned early on for travel, Joey Marella, Mike Chioda. As time went on, were there other travel partners? Did you travel alone?
No, I traveled a lot with Jimmy Corderas, another referee. I traveled with Larry Heck, the trainer, and Doc Sampson, who's now with AEW. We traveled a lot there. We would always have car rides where we'd solve all the company's problems, all the world's problems, just driving down the road, talking and stuff like that. And they were good times. I always say I don't necessarily miss the travel, but I miss the people, and I miss the hotel points and the frequent flyer miles. You
Right.
know,
Any road
so,
stories that stand out over your career? Things that you maybe witnessed, or just some funny incidents?
um, there was a time when it was me and Kyoto. We did a show in Philly, and Shane would come and work with us occasionally when he was in college. He'd work, winter break, summer break, whatever, because Vince wanted Shane to know the business from the bottom up. So Shane would work with us on the road and setting up the ring and stuff like that. So this one show we do in Philly, and Shane always busted his ass tearing the ring down and all that. And we got out of there quick. And we had the next day a show in Glens Falls, New York, which is about a 5-hour drive. And this is in the wintertime. So driving up to upstate New York in the wintertime isn't you don't know what you're going to get sometimes.
Yeah.
So the Nasty Boys happen to be on the card that day. They're from Allentown, which is about maybe 30 miles from Philly. And they had a bus of all their family and friends and stuff like that, and that homemade wine and all that. So Kyoto and Shane are like, yeah, we're just going to go over on the bus for a while, hang out for a little bit, and then we'll leave, okay? And I'm like, yeah. So I'm sitting in the ring truck. I'm going to drive. So I give them about 15, 20 minutes or whatever, beep the horn. They come out of the bus. They're like, yeah, we'll be right there, And I'm like, let's go. And mind you, this is before cell phones and all that.
Yeah.
So now I'm waiting another 15, 20 minutes. I start beeping the horn. Nobody comes out of the bus. Start beeping it again. No one's coming out of the bus.
Right.
So now I start slowly driving down the road. Slowly, see, maybe they'll see it and they'll start coming,
Yeah.
So they never end up coming. I end up and I left. So I left them two hanging there. Which Shane really didn't like. We always got into it about that, but worked it out 10 years later. But my point was, listen, we got to get to the next show. We got to show. If the ring don't make it there, there's no show.
Exactly.
So, Shane's like, well, you can't leave your buddies hanging, and it was just, but then we ended up working it out. And Shane was always like, listen, I'm going to make you drive one day from when I'm running this business, I'm going to make you drive from Alaska all the way to Stamford, Connecticut,
right,
with the ring truck. So,
oh my gosh,
that never happened. We worked it out, thank God. But yeah, that was one of the road stories there.
And 38 years of travel, did you have favorite spots to eat? You're going to a particular city, like, oh man, I can't wait to hit this place.
Yeah, I remember very early on when we would do Baltimore, there was this place, I forget what the name of it was, but it was right down the street from the arena, and we could walk there. And me and Joey used to go and eat there all the time. Joey's actually the one that turned me on to Chinese food, because in your early 20s, I was like, well, I didn't really eat Chinese food. He's like, come on, I know what to do, and what to get. And, he turned me on to that. I know there was a place in White Plains, New York, just a normal old Chinese restaurant down the street from the arena. Larry Heck and Doc Sampson turned me on to sushi. This was probably when I was about 40 years old or so, and we were overseas in England, and I think we were in Nottingham, and we got to Nottingham in the afternoon, and they're like, Chimel, there's a great sushi restaurant down in the lobby. Come on with us. I'm like, I'm not eating sushi. And they said, come on, we know what you like. We know what you don't like. Just come down and try it. And I did. And I ended up liking it. And I love sushi now. Yeah. So
you mentioned international, obviously 38 years, you must have been on a lot of international tours over the years. Some of those early 90s international tours, 91, 92. Any memories from that time period, whether it be fan interaction or stories with the boys?
I'm horrible at remembering years and what happened in years. It all just kind of blends together for me. But I know that we went to Israel one year, right around Easter time. And there's a bunch of us, probably about 6 of us or so, that were able to go on this little tour of old Jerusalem and see all that stuff, which was pretty cool.
Wow.
On an Easter Sunday afternoon. So that was really nice. I remember when we were in India one time, we were able to go see the Taj Mahal. and there's about 6 or 8 of us that went on that. Worst bus ride I was ever in my life, driving through the streets of India, which, trust me, they're not all paved roads,
Right.
And, did that. So I got to see a lot of, nice things and good sights and stuff like that. I always tell people traveling is a really good educator, and you learn a lot when you travel around the country and around the world.
And as a ring announcer, once you got into that duty, was travel paid for? Rental cars, hotel, flights?
Oh, yeah. I was an employee, so they paid for everything.
Okay.
They did. Our hotels were like, I had a company American Express card, so I would prepay for the hotel and then just do my expenses, and they would reimburse me for that. But I got all the hotel points. Now, travel was different, or airline travel. They had a travel department, so we would go on the computer, type in our flights, and then it would have to go through the approval process. But flying out of Philly most of the time, the cheapest flights were American and direct. So that's what I took, and, was able to go on a lot of free flights for vacations with the family and the kids and stuff like that. So,
yeah. What are your memories of Madison Square Garden? Obviously, it's the Mecca in pro wrestling and in sports and entertainment as a whole. Your earliest experiences, making it to MSG.
Yeah, that was one of the places that had its own ring, but we would still go there. But I remember just getting there was brutal. I knew how to get from the Lincoln Tunnel to Madison Square Garden, and from Madison Square Garden to the Lincoln Tunnel. I didn't know how to drive anywhere else in Manhattan, but I knew how to do that, and we had to drive the ring truck there, and it's brutal because there's a long ramp that you got to go up to go into the Madison Square, the actual arena levels, like on the 5th floor. So you're driving up this big ramp that luckily the truck was able to fit in. A semi couldn't fit in, so you had to lug the stuff once they started going to semis there. But wow. The 24-foot truck would go there. But we were setting up, and I remember when we were tearing down, we were trying to get out as quick as possible. And of course, you can't touch much anything there. The union guys have to do it all, So it's about 11:45, and we got maybe about 10 minutes of work left. And we're like, all right, let's go. We only got a little bit left. Let's pump this out. They're like, well, we got to stop. He said, we're done at 12 o'clock. And I'm like, yeah, well, it's only 11:45, and they're like, yeah, we got wash up time and stuff like that. So you got to wait till the midnight crew comes in to finish the job.
Oh, man.
So, the New York, I always say, when you're in the union, you love the union. When you're not in the union, you hate the union.
Right. And all that travel, 38 years, what are some of your favorite arenas or venues that you've worked out of that you looked forward to going to?
Well, I always like doing Philly. That was a good one. I'm not a big fan of the West Coast. I don't like the 3-hour time difference. So that was always brutal. Yeah. Any arena where you could pull the truck right on up and set up in an easy setup, that's what we were all about. It really didn't matter. I always thought Charlotte was a nice town. It was always fun when you're living in Philly or Jersey doing shows in Florida, where the weather's nice, stuff like that. So now I live here. So
right.
It's all
Jimmy
good.
Miranda in merchandise.
Yeah.
Another guy, we lost him early. He had a great reputation. Everybody loved him. Any memories of Jimmy Miranda over the years?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Oh, no, that's okay. Any memories of Jimmy Miranda over the years working with him?
Oh, yeah. He's the godfather to my daughter. He was the best. I loved him. He was a great guy, always in merch, always the right thing. I remember one time I was traveling with him, and obviously did merch. So after the show, he wouldn't be ready to go for another hour or two because he had to count out the merch and all that. So I, of course, smart thinking, like, how can I get out of here quicker? So I found the ride with somebody else. So I go to Jimmy later in the afternoon there. I'm like, Jimmy, I I'm not going to be riding with you to the next town. I'm going to be going with, I forget whoever it was. And he's like, no, you're not. He's like, you're traveling with me. We're together. We were traveling together. and I'm like, yeah, but I can get out like 2 hours early. He's like, Chimel, that's not what friends do to friends. You're riding with me. And there I was. I rode with him. And he was always a good friend. I loved him. He was the best.
Yeah. Another great, really a cornerstone of WWE for so long, Tim White. Any memories of Timmy or the
Yeah,
friendly
we used
tap?
to love doing Providence, Rhode Island, and going to the friendly tap. Timmy took care of us whenever we went there. That was always great. And, it was a good time. And Timmy was always a good friend, a great referee and stuff like that. People don't realize, they have this Hall of Fame with all these wrestlers and other people, Drew Carey or whatever the section it is and all that. But there are so many people that need to be in there that help build that company and do things for that company that they just poo-poo. You mentioned the camera guys, people like that, everybody that does that,
And what's your take on that? The Ultimate Warrior, when he was inducted into the Hall of Fame, he said he'd like to see the Jimmy Miranda Award. And just like you said, recognize those behind the scenes.
Yeah.
We've seen Tim White go in. He was the first referee to go in. Do you think we'll see that moving forward? Any behind the scenes people?
I don't know. I probably not because, they're all about making the money. They were when Vince was there, and now it's probably even worse. I don't know. I really don't pay much attention to it or watch much. But from what I just see from the outside, just them doing WrestleMania in Saudi and all that, they're going to go where the money goes. And, putting a Rambo in the Hall of Fame, which is well-deserved, is not going to sell tickets to anybody, and that's all they're worried about, really. So I don't think you'll probably see much of that stuff going on because I got a list of probably about 100 people that deserve to be in.
Yeah. And as an employee, behind the scenes, was it different for you? Did you feel the change when it went from a mom and pop to a public company?
Well, that happened. I'm trying to think because I was there. I wasn't there when after it was sold, I think. I don't know. When was it sold?
That would have been the early 2000s, right?
No, because Vince was still running things and all that, This had to have been like after COVID or right before COVID because I was let go during COVID.
Okay.
And I'm talking about like when they sold it to the MMA people or TK.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was probably around COVID. Yeah.
So I don't know. I really, that's when I got let go. So I didn't,
Gotcha. Yeah.
I didn't really know, but it is what it is. I had a good career there and, it was different, ours is the same when you were working for Vince. I mean, the business just kept growing and growing and doing more,
Sure.
And now it's like, I don't know. Yeah.
Sorry. Mark Eaton, a timekeeper, he was there for many years. Any memories of him?
Best. Yeah. Traveled with him a lot too. Traveled with him. Although I remember me and him had to drive from New Jersey all the way to Calgary and set a ring up at Bret Hart's house. And, I traveled many a miles with him. He's a guy that deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. That guy went above and beyond the call of duty. And I worked with him in the production office. He taught me a lot about when I was working in the production office, how to do stuff there. He was let go in a shitty way. And, that went down horribly and probably should have never been let go. But again, they're thinking about money and who can do it cheaper, and stuff like that. So.
And you did some stuff with AEW, of course. What was your experience like working there?
I always had a good time there. I mean, they're a little smaller operation and, run things a little differently. But the people there are nice. I mean, they work, I knew a lot of WWE people there that are there now and stuff like that. And it was a nice little run that I had there and very grateful for the time I had there. And, they do their thing the way they want to do their thing,
Is there anything that you have obtained over the years throughout your career that maybe really means a lot to you? Just a piece that you have still to this day?
Let me see.
A little bit of everything.
I got a football signed by Joe Theismann.
There you go.
I'm a big Redskins fan, and I got one of my buddies at work got me a football signed by Joe Theismann. It says I'm the world's greatest ring announcer. So I remember one time at WrestleMania, Noah Syndergaard, who was an ex-Met pitcher, I'm a big Mets fan. He signed a baseball for me. We've always had baseballs in the production office in case, a local baseball player came to the show.
Sure.
Sign baseballs for people. So I had Noah Syndergaard sign it to the greatest ring announcer.
That's fantastic.
So I have an autograph from him too. I got a lot of nice stuff and, memorabilia and things like that. I don't know if anything really stands out. I like that picture 35 years in the business. I ended up being 38. Not too many people have done that. So,
Yeah. You mentioned Noah, obviously when it comes to pro wrestling, coincides with celebrity interaction. There's always celebrities a part of the WrestleManias. Any other interactions over the years with any of the celebrities that stand out?
Well, I remember seeing Snoop Dogg there. I mean, well, we've had so many. Trump was at a show once, at least a couple times, I think. He did the WrestleMania match with Vince.
Yeah.
I remember one. This was at a WrestleMania, so I get done announcing my matches. That's when we had like 2 or 3 different people announcing. So I'm done with mine. So now I get changed. I go back to the dressing room. I go back to the production office to start working and tearing down. And my boss comes to me. He's like, Chimel, can you go find somebody that has some Marlboros, cigarettes, and go down to Kid Rock's locker room. There's a guy named Dan that needs cigarettes. I'm like, oh, whatever. So I started asking around, and somebody gave me a half a pack of Marlboro Lights. So I go down to Kid Rock's locker room, knock on the door, and I said, is there some guy named Dan here that is looking for cigarettes? He's like, yeah, I'm Dan. I'm like, here, I got you like a half a pack of Marlboro Lights. He's like, oh, thanks, man. I really appreciate it. You want to come in and meet Kid Rock? And I'm like, nah, I'll pass. So I turned down a little meet and greet with Kid Rock. I'm like, well, maybe if you have Mick Jagger back there, I'll go. But
exactly. A little different, right?
Yeah. So
now the new generation, the mid 90s, 1994, 1995, you had some of the, obviously the money was a little down. The ratings were lower. You had the Monday Night Wars just about to start. What's your take on that era of wrestling when we had the different characters like the Mantars and the TL Hoppers?
Yeah, they would try to throw anything out there, a gimmicky thing or whatever, and just see what works, which, the business just changes and evolves. I remember when I first started, managers were a big thing, and then they did away with managers, and I don't know, some guys, I guess, needed managers because the managers were the ones that could cut a better promo than the talent, So I think, but as wrestling evolved and talent became better at talking, it really didn't need a bunch of managers. And, I guess that's how that went down. But they were always thinking of gimmicks, like the Goon, the hockey guy, and, Outback Jack and all these, weird things. And some of it sticks, some of it don't,
Yeah. And when it specifically comes to ring announcing, just kind of walk us through a day in your shoes. What time is call time for you? When you get to the arena, what do you do before the show?
Well, are we talking like a TV?
Yeah.
Okay, so at TV, unlike most of the other announcers, the announcing gig was like the second gig. I was working in the production office or setting up the ring. So when I started working in the production office, I would probably get in around 7 o'clock in the morning, and we would unload trucks, make sure that goes well, set up the production office. We would designate rooms for different areas. This is where the male talent's going to go. That's where female talent's going to go. This is where pre-tapes or whatever. We would designate that and walk the building with the arena people. where we're going to put this, put that, sign the rooms, make sure everyone knows where the rooms are, get the production office running. Like I said, we had runners, so I was in charge of the runners and the money then. So I'd have to go up to the box office and get like 10 grand so I can float out runners and pay for things during the show and all that. Because heaven forbid, sometimes they might be like, hey, we need like $3,000 to go buy a used car so they can trash it during the show or something, you know? So, that would be what I was doing up until about maybe 4:00 in the afternoon. And then you would have to go out there for rehearsals. If you were needed for, you'd go out, you wouldn't know if you were needed or not until they said, oh yeah, Chimel, do this, but if you weren't there, the excuse is not, oh, well, I'm working in a production office. That don't fly with the truck or Kevin Dunn or any of those people,
Right.
As far as they're concerned, they could care less about that. They want you there when they want you there. So you would have to be there for maybe a couple hours or so. And then after that, I would probably just go back, get dressed, get in my suit, get ready to ring announce, just go over the show, know who I'm announcing, when they're announcing, when they're coming out and all that. And then I'd go out, do the show at, 8:00 or, well, they did pre-matches or something, say maybe 7:30 or something, go out there, announce. After the show, come back, help tear down the production office, and probably walk out of the arena at like midnight or, 1 a.m.
Wow. Talk about a full day.
Yeah, I know. And that's why I'm looking at like, I'm like, well, what else do they do? They just ring announce. So what do? They show up at like 4:00 and that's it. And they announce a few people.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's different. I don't know.
Well, one of the biggest names in pro wrestling history, Andre the Giant. Do you have any experiences with him over the years?
Yeah, when we were traveling, Andre would always be in the back, like I said, playing cards with Arnie or somebody like that. And Andre liked his wine. And I remember Brawler coming to we walked back in the locker room. It was me, Kyoto, Brawler was back there, and Andre was playing cards, probably with Arnie or something. But Brawler's like, Kyoto, Andre needs some wine. Can you go get him some wine? And Kyoto said, no, I can't, which he legit probably couldn't because, we got a show to do soon and he's got a referee and stuff like that. But Brawler was like, listen, you never say no to Andre. You got to do what he wants.
Yeah.
And we were just too naive to know at that point, like, oh, I guess we should just say, yes, we'll go get you wine, boss,
Right. My goodness.
Yeah.
And of course, the road agents, you work directly with some of them, obviously, leading up to the matches. Any interactions with guys like Rene Goulet and Blackjack Lanza, memories of Tony Gurria?
Yeah. Yeah. They were all great guys. Rene Goulet, give me 5 more minutes. When he was wrestling, he'd always be after the match. Give me 5 more minutes to wrestle. Tony Gurria was always great. Big conspiracy guy, but he was always a great guy. Jack Lanza ran the shortest show in the history of shows. We loved it. Springfield, Massachusetts. I think the show lasted an hour and 20 minutes. It was an afternoon show. I think it started at 1:00. And I think the boys had either flights to catch or something like that. And the show had to go over pretty quick, but I don't think they wanted to go a minute or an hour and 20 minutes. But it did. And I think Lanza got some heat for that. But on the ring crew at that point, we didn't care. We were out of that building by 3:00 in the afternoon and home at like 7:00 because Springfield was one of those buildings where you could pull the ring truck all the way up. Exactly. And you had help there, guys that knew how to do the ring. And we were out of there in a half hour and we're like, this is great. This was the best show ever.
Yeah. Now, how about WrestleMania? Your greatest WrestleMania memory. Do you have anything that stands out?
Well, I enjoyed that thing where Beth wanted me to come on stage at the Hall of Fame there and introduce Edge, which I thought was a really nice thing. That's probably my best WrestleMania memory, if I can say the Hall of Fame thing,
And how did that come about with the announcing for Edge? How did that transpire?
Well, before Edge was around, we had the Mexicools or whatever, and there was one of the guys super crazy. But anyway, so when we're driving around in the car, me and Corderis and Larry and whoever else, Hornswoggle was in the car at times. We would all, when somebody would do something stupid, the old cartoon with Wile E. Coyote, and someone would say, Wile E. Coyote, super genius, So I started introducing super crazy as super crazy. And then when he left, Edge was like, Chimel, you announced John Cena, like, oh, it's all big and everything, and you just, Edge, So when he became the Rated R Superstar, I started introducing him like that, and he really loved it. So now I do it, and, it took off. So, now I even do it on Cameo. People want to be introduced as, a Rated R Superstar or WWE Superstar, as long as they get the Superstar thing in, They love that.
And why don't you tell us about that? You're on Cameo, of course.
I'm on Cameo. Anyone can join in or whatever. Ask for something. It's at Tony Chimel 6986. That would be the 2 years that the Mets won the World Series, 1969 and 1986. But anyway, I've done business ones. I just did some voiceover stuff for some Ringside Collectibles. I've done wedding intros. I've done birthday stuff. I've done stuff about a friend passing away, all sorts of stuff. And I enjoy it, and the people enjoy it. I get good star ratings and all that. And just look me up on Cameo at Tony Chimel 6986. Be happy to solve any problems or help you out any way I can.
And I highly recommend it. I've seen some of them, so you do a fantastic job, and you really put in the effort. So I certainly encourage you, the fans, to definitely check him out on there. And what was the atmosphere? What was your point of view when WCW was acquired by WWF?
Yeah, we were all shocked. That was a huge kayfabe, because then when, I remember sitting at ringside because I was announcing then, and Shane came on, and I was like, oh my God. And then that came down. And then probably like a few days after that, there was a few of us, my boss, Steve Taylor at the time, and me and Kyoto and a couple other ring guys had to fly down to Atlanta and go check out all the stuff that Vince bought, the warehouse, how many rings they got, what are they doing with all this. I remember sitting in Eric Bischoff's office, sitting in his chair, like, damn, because back then it was like they were total enemies. And it's like, geez, a week later, we got this company and I'm sitting in Bischoff's chair,
Yeah. And what happened to all the merchandise and all the stuff that was,
I don't know. I mean, we went down there, and I don't know if they sold the merch. I don't know if they, what they do, but that was way beyond our paycheck back in the day. So, that was weird going down to Atlanta and going into their warehouse and office and all that, and just rummaging around and seeing what they had and, what the company could use or not use. So,
any memories you can share of Steve Taylor?
He wasn't my favorite boss in the world, but, there was one time when I was announcing, and this was earlier in my career, when I would get paid a salary for being on the ring crew. And then if you ring announced, you got like $200. And if I time kept, I got $50. So I would make I think it was 150 to ring announce and $50 to time keep. So as they're making changes with the company, they were like, well, we're not paying the timekeeper. We're not paying anyone to take jackets anymore, which was taking money. Granted, it's only $50, but back then, that's money, especially if you're doing it 2 or 3 or 4 times a week. So I'm like, well, I said, Steve, if they're taking away that, can you just pay me $200 for ring announcing instead of, and I'm just time keep for free, that way, at least I'm making the same amount of money. And he's like, Chimel, if you weren't doing this, what do you think you'd be doing? similar to the question you asked me at the beginning. And he always said to me, if you have a problem with anything I do, you can go to Vince. So I was fed up with it at that time. And I went to Vince and I told Vince the story. And, I told him about, hey, they're cutting the pay. And I just asked for, just to make the same, and all that. And Vince said, when I told him what Steve told me, Vince is like, please don't tell me he told you that. And he's like, I said, yeah, he did. So like the next day I was tearing the ring down at TV and Steve pulled me over and he's like, Tony, I talked to Vince and we're going to figure something out for you and we'll make it better, So after that, everything, I was just paid a salary. So everything was just lumped into one thing. So I made just one basic salary and I made that for, doing the ring announcing, whatever I was needed to do at the show, timekeep, take jackets, whatever. So I was just paid a salary. So it worked out very well for me. And I always was grateful for Vince, the way he stood up for me like that.
Wow. Well, that's great that it worked out in your favor.
Yeah.
Now, what did you say the hardest part of your job was over the years, all the different things you've done?
Well, now when I get on a plane, I don't know. I say to myself, I'm like, how the hell did I do this for 38 years? This travel stuff. I mean, just being on a plane. I mean, a 2-hour flight is one thing, but when you're leaving LAX at, 11:30 at night and traveling all the way to Tokyo or all the way to Sydney, Australia, and, you leave on a Monday night at 11:30 a.m. LA time and you get into Sydney, Australia Wednesday morning at 5:00 in the morning, you miss a whole day, Tuesday, because you cross the international date line. And, now you're in Australia at 5 a.m. in the morning. By the time you get to the hotel, it's 8 a.m. in the morning. And guess what? You got a show at 7:30 that day, So those things were like ridiculous, the travel and then working the shows. And I'm like, I'm not even a talent. I can just imagine, I look at the bigger guys that aren't, your Cenas and Takers, they're up in first class or business class, but the rest of us schmoes are sitting in coach. And you get some of these bigger boys that were mid-card guys or lower who are 6'5" or 6'6" and, 280 pounds. They're sitting in these little seats for 18, 20 hours, and then they got to go wrestle. I'm like, geez, that was brutal. The travel, the long drives and stuff like that. Yeah. That was, probably the hardest stuff. Being away from the family was really brutal too. I was gone upwards of, 20, 24 days a month. My wife kind of raised our 3 kids by herself. God bless her. We're still together. And, she had to suck up a lot of stuff with WWE, a lot,
Now, with all these companies doing the action figures now, will we ever see a Tony Chimel action figure?
I don't know. I would love to, I would love to see one. I would love to have one. Kyoto gave me one of his. Oh, here's a Kyoto action figure.
Oh, wow. Fantastic.
He just was over visiting a little while ago and a few weeks ago. So he gave me one of his action figures. But yeah, I would like to, but no one's ever called me up or said, hey, we'll make an action figure of you.
So we got to get that done. We got to get that Tony Chimel action figure out there without a doubt.
Yeah.
So 2 more announcers that we just didn't touch on yet. Any experiences with Lillian Garcia or Mike McGuirk?
I remember Mike McGuirk when I first started. She was one of the ones that I kind of, was watching first or whatever and saw how she announced. Really didn't know her too much on a personal level. Lillian was very good and nice. I kind of taught her how to, they had me instructing her and teaching her how to announce and stuff like that. So I helped her out and, she was always a pleasure to work with.
Any advice you have to an aspiring announcer who'd like to do that with, maybe the wrestling business?
Well, I know it's a totally different era these days and stuff like that. And everybody's like, oh, look at me on Twitter or Instagram or whatever the hell the gaga is these days. I was never into any of that stuff. If you're announcing, put over the talent, not yourself. It's not like, oh, look at me, I'm doing this or whatever. You're announcing the talent, and they're the stars. I don't know if it's because I did 20 different jobs other than ring announcing, but I just thought that was just like, oh, it's another one of the gigs. Nowadays, I think people are out there like, oh, look at me. I'm some big ring announcer. I never really looked at it that way. I was like, I got to go work in a production office now, you know? So.
And you got a lot of fans out there, you know, to the fans. What type of message do you have? What would you like to say right now to the fans out there?
Well, without them, I wouldn't have had a job. I mean, let's face it, they're the ones that paid the mortgage, really. And, you know, they've always been nice to me. And one of the things I always like to do with the fans, whenever they would ask for an autograph or something, you get the occasional guy that had a Yankee hat on or something like that. He wants a picture. I'm like, sure, I'll take a picture with you, but you got to take that Yankee hat off first. So I always like to joke around with the fans. You know, they were always fun because, you know, when I'm not in the ring announcing, I'm sitting right on the other side of the barricade, and there's always people around you asking you stuff and, hey, how you doing, and this and that, or whatever, you know. So
sure,
it was always a good time.
And in closing,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say I'm very appreciative of the fans and the way they've always treated me throughout the years.
And let's just kind of run down your cameo again for the fans who missed that part.
Yeah, I'm on Cameo. I can do. You know, like I said, I've done birthday wishes. I've done wedding things that they use for their wedding, walking down the aisle, or, you know, first time in public, anything like that. Any request you need, I'm willing to help you out. I can do that. Just look me up on Cameo. It's at Tony Chimel, 6986.
Awesome. And fast forwarding many years down the road when we're all gone, what do you want your legacy to be? How do you want to be remembered?
I'd just like to be remembered as a guy who helped build the company, one of many who helped build the company. And that's, to me, was the greatest legacy, because it wouldn't be the place that it is today without a bunch of other people that, you know, never get credit and never get any recognition. The people that helped build it and start the place, there's tons of people that were there 25, 30, 35 years or more. You know, I'm one, but I mean, there's a lot of people that have been there, some employees, some not employees. And, you know, it changes all the time. And if you can, like you said, hang any place for that long, you know, you're doing something right. And that's all that I'd like to be remembered, as a guy that was a good ring announcer and worked hard and helped build the WWE.
Well, Tony, just know that your talents have certainly been appreciated, and we thank you for all the time that you've put into the business.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for joining us today. For Tony Chimel, I am Joseph Bruen, and this has been the All Access Entertainment Podcast. Keep your eyes peeled for the bonus segment, and don't forget to subscribe and like the page. Thank you so much. We'll see you guys next time.